Alex Collins, a devoted firefighter and father, thought he had the perfect life, until betrayal unraveled everything. Framed by his wife and her lover, Alex loses his family and home. But when shocking truths surface, he fights back, risking everything to reclaim his daughter and rebuild his life from the ashes.
The sound of the fire station alarm shattered the silence of the early morning. Alex Collins bolted upright, instinctively reaching for his gear. Years of experience had honed his reflexes, and within seconds, he was sliding down the polished fireman's pole, joining his crew. The urgency of a call never lost its grip on him, even after a decade in the service. "House fire on Maple Street," the dispatcher's voice crackled over the intercom. "Let's move," Alex barked, his voice steady and commanding. His crew responded with practiced efficiency, piling into the fire truck as its sirens wailed to life. Inside the cab, the adrenaline surged. Alex glanced at the rookie, a fresh-faced kid barely out of the academy. "Stay sharp, Jenkins. No room for mistakes," he said, his tone firm but not unkind. As the truck roared down the streets, Alex's mind briefly drifted to his family. His wife, Sarah, was likely still asleep, the soft hum of the air conditioner their nightly lullaby. 8-year-old Maddie would be nestled in her bed, her favorite stuffed rabbit tucked under her arm. The thought steadied him. They were his anchor. By the time the truck reached Maple Street, flames were already licking hungrily at the 2-story house. Smoke billowed into the dawn sky, and a panicked woman stood outside, clutching a crying toddler. "My husband's still in there," she screamed, her voice cracking. "Collins, Jenkins, go!" the captain ordered. Without hesitation, Alex and Jenkins donned their masks and charged into the inferno. The heat was suffocating, but Alex pushed through, his movements calculated and precise. The sound of the fire roared in his ears, accompanied by the creak of weakening beams. "Over here!" Jenkins shouted, pointing toward a collapsed section of the living room. Alex spotted the man pinned under a fallen beam, his eyes wide with terror. Together, they lifted the heavy debris, every muscle in Alex's body screaming in protest. "Can you walk?" Alex asked, pulling the man to his feet. I think so," the man stammered, coughing violently. "Good. Follow me. Stay low," Alex commanded, his voice cutting through the chaos. The trio made it out just as the roof caved in behind them. Outside, the woman let out a sob of relief, throwing her arms around her husband. Alex peeled off his helmet, wiping the sweat from his brow. "Good work," the captain said, clapping him on the back. By the time Alex returned home, the sun was fully up, casting a golden glow over the quiet suburban streets. His house stood at the end of a cul-de-sac, its neat lawn and white picket fence a stark contrast to the chaos he'd just left behind. Inside, Sarah was bustling around the kitchen, her phone pressed to her ear. She wore a sleek blouse and pencil skirt, her dark hair pulled into a tight bun. Even at home, she exuded professionalism. "Yes, I'll email the proposal by noon," she was saying. Spotting Alex, she gave him a distracted wave. "Rough morning?" she asked after hanging up. "House fire," Alex replied, pouring himself a cup of coffee. Sarah nodded, barely registering his words as she checked her email. "Maddie's still asleep. I've got a meeting in an hour, so I'll be out most of the day." Alex took a sip of coffee, the bitterness grounding him. "I'll make sure Maddie's ready for school." Later, as he drove Maddie to school, her chatter filled the car. She was talking about a science project, her excitement contagious. "Daddy, do you think we can make a volcano that actually erupts?" she asked, her blue eyes wide with curiosity. "Sure thing, kiddo. We'll make the best volcano in the class," Alex promised, smiling. Maddie's face lit up and Alex felt a pang of guilt. His job often kept him away from moments like these. He resolved to make it up to her. That evening, Sarah brought up the idea of hiring a tutor for Maddie. "Her grades in math are slipping," she said, frowning. "I don't have the time to help her, and she needs the extra support." Alex hesitated. Can't we work with her ourselves? Sarah shook her head, her expression firm. She needs someone qualified. I've already found someone. Cassandra Morris, a college student. She comes highly recommended. Alex sighed but agreed. Maddie's education came first. When Cassandra, or Cassie, arrived for her first session, Alex was immediately struck by her energy. She was young, probably no more than 21, with auburn hair pulled into a ponytail and a bright, eager smile. "Hi, Mr. Collins," she said cheerfully. "I'm Cassie. It's great to meet you." Alex returned her smile, though he felt a slight unease he couldn't place. Over the next few weeks, Cassie became a regular presence in their home. Maddie adored her, and her grades began to improve. Sarah seemed satisfied, and Alex was grateful for the positive change. But then, subtle shifts began to occur. Cassie lingered longer than necessary after lessons, striking up conversations with Alex. She complimented his cooking when he made dinner, laughed a little too hard at his jokes, and seemed to find excuses to be near him. Alex brushed it off at first, attributing it to her bubbly personality. But one evening, as he passed her in the hallway, her hand briefly brushed his arm. The touch lingered just a moment too long, and Alex felt his stomach twist. Sarah was oblivious, consumed by her work. Her phone buzzed constantly, and her attention was always elsewhere. Alex didn't bring up his concerns about Cassie. It seemed too ridiculous to even voice. But the tension grew. One night, after a late lesson, Cassie approached Alex in the kitchen. "You're really amazing, you know that," she said, her voice soft. Alex frowned. "Cassie, this isn't appropriate." She looked at him, her eyes wide and earnest. "I just admire you, that's all. You're such a good father and so strong. Maddie and Sarah are lucky to have you." Alex stepped back, his jaw tightening. "Thank you, but you should go. It's late." Cassie nodded, her expression unreadable. As the door closed behind her, Alex exhaled, his mind racing. Something wasn't right, and he couldn't ignore it any longer. It started with the looks, those fleeting, seemingly harmless glances. At first, Alex barely noticed. Cassie was young and chatty, full of energy and enthusiasm. During Maddie's tutoring sessions, she was entirely focused on the little girl, guiding her through math problems with patience and encouragement. But outside the sessions, her demeanor toward Alex began to shift. "Mr. Collins," she said one evening, her tone unusually warm, "you're such a great dad. Maddie's lucky to have you." Alex smiled politely. "Thanks, Cassie. She's a great kid, but please call me Alex." Cassie's eyes lingered on his a moment longer than they should have. "Okay, Alex." The way she said his name sent a faint ripple of unease through him. He brushed it off, thinking he was imagining things. But as weeks went by, her compliments grew bolder. "You're really fit for someone with such a busy job," she said once, while Maddie fetched her workbook. Alex froze, caught off guard. Thanks. Gotta stay in shape for the job," he replied, laughing awkwardly. It wasn't just the compliments. Cassie found reasons to linger after lessons, her casual goodbyes stretching into small talk about everything from firefighting to her college classes. She laughed too loudly at his jokes, and more than once Alex caught her staring at him when she thought he wasn't looking. Still, he told himself it was innocent. She was young, likely just being friendly. Nothing to worry about. It was a Saturday evening when things took a turn. Sarah had taken Maddie to visit her mother for the weekend, leaving Alex with a rare, quiet night at home. He was sprawled on the couch, the muted light of the TV casting shadows across the living room, when the doorbell rang. The unexpected sound jarred him from his half-asleep state. He frowned, glancing at the clock. It was nearly 9 p.m., not the kind of hour for casual visits. Rising reluctantly, he rubbed his face and shuffled toward the door, his curiosity growing. He opened it to find Cassie standing there, her face lit by the soft glow of the porch light. Cassie? What are you doing here? She smiled sheepishly, holding up a textbook as if it were a peace offering. I think Maddie forgot this. I didn't want her to lose it before her next lesson. Alex blinked, confused. Maddie hadn't mentioned forgetting anything, but before he could question it, his eyes caught on Cassie's appearance. She wasn't dressed like the casually dressed college student he was accustomed to seeing. She wore a tight black dress that hugged her figure, her hair cascading in loose waves over her shoulders, and makeup far more elaborate than her usual understated look. Her lips were painted a bold red, and her eyeliner flicked into a sharp wing. Thanks, he said, his tone guarded as he stepped aside. You didn't have to come all the way over. It's no trouble, she replied lightly, stepping inside before he could say anything further. As he closed the door behind her, a wave of unease settled over him. Something about this felt off. Maddie's not here, though. Sarah took her to her grandmother's. Oh, I know, Cassie said breezily, placing the book on the coffee table. I just thought I'd drop it off anyway. It's important, right? The way she said it, the casualness in her tone, clashed with the deliberate care she took in placing the book down. Her movements felt slow, almost rehearsed. Well, I appreciate it, Alex said, his voice tightening slightly. Have a good night. Cassie didn't move to leave. Instead, she turned to face him fully, her eyes scanning his face in a way that made his skin prickle. You're really incredible, you know that? She said suddenly, her voice softer than before. Alex frowned, the unease inside him growing. What? As a firefighter, she clarified, though her gaze didn't match the casual nature of her words. As a dad. As you. Her words hung in the air like a lit fuse, sparking an intensity Alex hadn't anticipated. Cassie, this is inappropriate, Alex said, his tone firm as he took a step back, putting more space between them. Why? Because I think you're amazing? She asked, her voice light but edged with something that made his pulse quicken. You should go, he said, his voice hardening as he gestured toward the door. But Cassie didn't budge. She moved closer instead, closing the gap he had just created. Her hand brushed against his arm lightly, lingering for a moment too long. Alex, I'm not trying to cause trouble, she said, her voice trembling slightly as if she were nervous. I just admire you so much. Cassie, stop, Alex said, his voice low and forceful. But she didn't. Before he could step away, before he could fully process what was happening, she leaned up and pressed her lips to his. For a moment, Alex froze, his body stiff with shock. Her perfume, sweet and overpowering, filled his senses, and the warmth of her lips lingered on his. Then his instincts kicked in, and he pulled back sharply, his heart pounding in his chest. Cassie, what the hell are you doing? He demanded, his voice rising in anger and disbelief. Cassie started, her voice small, as if she hadn't anticipated his reaction. The sound of the front door opening cut through the tension like a knife. Sarah? Alex's voice cracked as he turned, panic washing over him. There, standing in the doorway, was Sarah, her face pale and frozen in a mixture of shock and fury. Beside her stood Maddie, clutching a small bag of groceries, her wide eyes darting between her parents. What the hell is going on? Sarah's voice was sharp and laced with rage, breaking the silence that had fallen like a heavy weight. Mama, why is Daddy yelling? Maddie asked, her small voice trembling. Alex instinctively stepped forward, his hands raised as if to calm the situation. Sarah, this isn't what it looks like, I swear. Save it! Sarah snapped, her voice cutting through his protests like a whip. Her eyes darted to Cassie, who stood frozen, her cheeks flushed, and her gaze darting nervously to the floor. Cassie, to Alex's disbelief, started to cry. I'm so sorry, Mrs. Collins, she stammered, her voice shaking. I didn't mean for this to happen. It was a mistake. A mistake? Sarah's voice rose, her fury boiling over. You kissed him! I didn't know what I was thinking, Cassie stammered, wiping at her eyes with trembling hands. Sarah turned her fiery gaze on Alex. And you? What the hell is your excuse? Alex opened his mouth to explain, to defend himself, but the words caught in his throat. He looked at Maddie, whose wide eyes filled with tears, and the weight of the moment crushed him. Mama, don't yell at Daddy, Maddie pleaded, her voice breaking. Sarah scooped Maddie into her arms, her expression hard as stone. Come on, sweetie, we're leaving. Sarah, wait, Alex said, his voice desperate, but she didn't wait. She marched out the door, Maddie clinging to her shoulder, leaving Alex standing frozen in the middle of the living room, the weight of what had just happened crashing down around him. The days that followed felt like a relentless storm, each one darker and more chaotic than the last. Alex called Sarah's phone repeatedly, desperate to explain, to make her see reason, but his calls were ignored. He tried visiting the house, standing on the porch like an unwelcome stranger in front of what used to be his home. When Sarah finally answered the door one afternoon, her face was a mask of cold fury. What do you want, Alex? She demanded, her voice low and sharp enough to cut through steel. I need to talk to you, he said, his tone pleading. You have to believe me. Nothing happened. Don't, she interrupted, her voice rising. Her fingers tightened around the edge of the door. Don't you dare stand there and act innocent. I saw what I saw. Maddie saw it too. Sarah, it wasn't what it looked like, Alex insisted, his heart pounding. I didn't. She kissed me. I didn't want it. You destroyed our family, Sarah spat, her face twisting with anger. I don't ever want to see you again. With that, she slammed the door, the sound reverberating like a gunshot in the quiet suburban street. A week later, the divorce papers arrived. The terms were merciless. Sarah was awarded the house, full custody of Maddie, and Alex was relegated to supervised visitation every other weekend. The harsh reality of the situation struck him like a physical blow. Sitting at his rickety kitchen table in his cramped apartment, Alex stared at the papers for hours. He knew he could fight it, try to prove his innocence, but what would that do to Maddie? Dragging her through a bitter custody battle would only hurt her more. With shaking hands, he signed the papers. Each stroke of his pen felt like driving a nail into the coffin of his old life. Cassie disappeared from their lives as abruptly as she had entered them. Whether it was out of shame or a desire to avoid the fallout, Alex couldn't say. He didn't care. The damage was done, and her absence offered no solace. The apartment Alex now called home was a far cry from the warm, light-filled house he had shared with his family. The walls were thin, the plumbing unreliable, and the constant hum of the refrigerator seemed to mock the silence that surrounded him. At first, he tried to keep himself busy. Long shifts at the firehouse provided a temporary distraction, but when the day ended and he returned to the dingy, lifeless space, the reality of his situation hit him like a tidal wave. The nights were the worst. Alone with his thoughts, Alex found himself replaying the events that led to his downfall, each detail a dagger twisting in his chest. The image of Sarah's face, twisted with betrayal, and Maddie's tearful eyes haunted him. His refuge became the bottom of a bottle, the whiskey dulling the pain but never erasing it. On the weekends Maddie visited, Alex transformed his apartment into a semblance of order. He scrubbed the counters, vacuumed the threadbare carpet, and even bought her favorite snacks, arranging them neatly on the kitchen table. When she arrived, her presence was a balm to his soul, but the distance between them was palpable. Maddie, once vibrant and chatty, was now quiet and reserved. She answered his questions with short, hesitant responses, her bright blue eyes shadowed with confusion and sadness. Do you like your new school, sweetheart? Alex asked during one visit, forcing a smile as they sat together on the couch. It's okay, Maddie replied, fiddling with the hem of her shirt. Alex's heart ached. He wanted to ask more, to draw her out, but every attempt felt like pushing against an unyielding wall. As she played quietly in the corner with her toys, Alex sat at the table, staring at the remnants of her untouched lunch. He racked his brain, trying to figure out how to fix what had been broken. But no matter how hard he tried, the same thought haunted him. Was this all my fault? In his darkest moments, Alex began to wonder if his life was beyond repair. The weight of guilt and regret threatened to suffocate him, and the isolation of his new reality gnawed at the edges of his sanity. Every night, as he lay on the creaky bed in the suffocating stillness of the apartment, one thought echoed in his mind. How did I let it come to this? What Alex didn't know was that the cracks in his life were not entirely of his own making. A darker truth lay buried beneath the surface, waiting to reveal itself and upend his world once again. Life after the divorce turned into a relentless series of blows for Alex. His once proud existence as a firefighter and devoted father had eroded into a shell of what it used to be. The small, dingy apartment he now called home was both a prison and a reminder of his fall from grace. The few friends he'd managed to hold on to from the firehouse grew distant, not out of malice, but because Alex's grief and self-pity seemed insurmountable. But it wasn't until the letter from Sarah's lawyer arrived that the fragile balance he'd been clinging to finally shattered. Petition for termination of parental rights, the bold letters on the first page read. Alex stared at the words, the implications punching him in the gut. His hands trembled as he flipped through the documents, each line more devastating than the last. Sarah, he whispered to himself, disbelief mingling with anger. How could she do this? He called her immediately, his voice shaking with fury when she picked up. What the hell is this, Sarah? He demanded. You're trying to take Maddie away from me completely? I'm protecting her, Sarah shot back, her tone icy. You're unstable, Alex. You've been drinking, and you're not fit to be around her. That's not true, Alex snapped. You can't just erase me from her life. You did that yourself, Sarah retorted. I'm not going to let you drag her down with you. She deserves better. Alex slammed the phone down, his breathing ragged. The weight of her words lingered, but a spark of defiance ignited within him. He wasn't going to let this stand. Maddie was his daughter, and he wouldn't give her up without a fight. The next day at the firehouse, Alex was unusually quiet, his mind preoccupied with the legal battle ahead. His shift captain, Hank, approached him during a break, holding an envelope. Hey, Collins, Hank said cautiously. Someone dropped this off for you. Looked kind of sketchy. Alex frowned, taking the envelope. It was unmarked, and the paper inside smelled faintly of cologne. He opened it carefully, his eyes narrowing as he pulled out a stack of glossy photographs. The first one was innocuous enough. Sarah and Maddie at a park, Maddie on a swing, her laughter frozen in the moment. But the second photo made Alex's stomach twist. A man stood beside Sarah, his hand resting casually on Maddie's shoulder. He flipped through the rest of the photos, his unease growing with each one. The man appeared in every shot, always close to Sarah and Maddie, his presence almost possessive. There was something about the way he leaned into Maddie, the way Sarah smiled at him, that sent a chill down Alex's spine. Who the hell is this guy? Alex muttered under his breath. That evening, Alex sat at his kitchen table, the photographs spread out in front of him. He scrutinized every detail, searching for clues. The man looked to be in his late 30s or early 40s, with neatly combed dark hair and an expensive suit. He exuded an air of confidence, but there was something unsettling about his presence. Alex decided to start with a reverse image search, uploading one of the photos to his laptop. After several dead ends, a match finally appeared. A corporate headshot of the same man. Alex's pulse quickened as he clicked on the link, which led to an old article from a local business journal. The piece praised Brent's meteoric rise in the pharmaceutical industry, but mentioned in passing that he had left his previous company under controversial circumstances. Alex dug deeper, his unease mounting with every new discovery. Brent had worked at the same company as Sarah years ago. He had resigned abruptly after allegations surfaced that he had been involved in the illegal sale of prescription medications. Although no charges had been filed, the scandal had tarnished his reputation. "Why is he with my daughter?" Alex muttered, his jaw clenching. Fueled by a mixture of rage and desperation, Alex reached out to one of his old friends who worked in private security. "I need a favor, Bill," Alex said over the phone. "I need you to dig up everything you can on a guy named Daniel Brent. I'll pay whatever it takes." Bill sighed. "Alex, you know this kind of thing doesn't come cheap." "I don't care," Alex replied. "This is about Maddie, please." 2 days later, Bill delivered a thick folder filled with information. Alex tore it open, his heart pounding. The file revealed more than he'd expected. Not only had Brent left his previous job under a cloud of suspicion, but he had also been involved in several questionable business ventures since then. More troubling, though, were the notes about his personal life. "He's been seeing Sarah," Bill said over the phone as Alex read the file. "For over a year now, according to the timeline." Alex's grip on the phone tightened. "Over a year?" "Yeah. Sorry, man. I thought you should know." Alex hung up, his thoughts spiraling. If Brent had been in Sarah's life for that long, it meant their relationship had started well before the divorce. A sickening realization settled over him. This wasn't just a coincidence. Brent wasn't some random guy Sarah had met after their marriage ended. He had been part of her life all along, lurking in the background, waiting for the right moment to step in. And now, he was trying to take Maddie too. Alex couldn't keep his suspicions to himself any longer. The next time he saw Maddie, he gently probed her about Brent. "Sweetheart, who's the man you've been spending time with?" he asked as they worked on a puzzle together. Maddie looked up, her brow furrowing. "You mean Danny? He's nice. He bought me ice cream." Alex's stomach turned. "Danny? Does he come over a lot?" "Sometimes," Maddie said with a shrug. "Mama says he's her friend." Alex forced a smile, though his heart felt like it was being crushed. He couldn't let this continue. Back in his apartment, Alex began to piece together a strategy. He knew confronting Sarah directly wouldn't work. She would deny everything, just as she always had. Instead, he needed proof, something irrefutable that would expose Brent for who he really was. With Bill's help, Alex started compiling evidence. Surveillance photos, financial records, and old court documents began to paint a damning picture of Brent's character. But as the pieces came together, Alex couldn't shake the feeling that he was only scratching the surface. The deeper he dug, the more questions arose. Why had Brent targeted Sarah and Maddie? Was this about revenge, money, or something even darker? Alex didn't know the answers yet, but one thing was clear: this was only the beginning. Alex was deep into his nightly routine, flipping through a stack of documents on Daniel Brent when his phone rang. The vibration startled him, its sound slicing through the quiet hum of his apartment. For a moment, he considered letting it go to voicemail. The late hour and the unfamiliar number only added to his reluctance, but something in the pit of his stomach urged him to answer. "Mr. Collins?" a calm, professional voice asked when he picked up. "Yes, this is Alex," he replied cautiously, his muscles tensing. "This is St. Mary's Hospital. We need you to come immediately. Your ex-wife and daughter have been in a car accident." The words hit him like a sledgehammer. Alex bolted upright, the file in his hands tumbling to the floor. "What?" he gasped. "Are they okay? What happened?" "They've sustained serious injuries," the voice replied, measured but urgent. "Your daughter needs a blood transfusion, and we require your immediate presence. Please come as quickly as you can." The line clicked dead before Alex could ask anything further. His hand froze on the phone, the weight of the call sinking in. Panic surged through his chest, driving out every other thought. Scrambling, Alex grabbed his jacket and keys, his movements clumsy with adrenaline. "Hold on, Maddie," he whispered under his breath. "I'm coming." The streets were a blur of headlights and shadow as Alex sped toward the hospital, his knuckles white against the steering wheel. Every turn felt like a lifetime, his mind playing cruel tricks as flashes of Maddie's smile mixed with the image of Sarah lying unconscious in a mangled car. "What if I never get to fix this?" he muttered, gripping the wheel tighter. The traffic lights were meaningless to him now. He ran through red after red, horns blaring angrily as other cars swerved to avoid him. He barely noticed. Every second spent not moving forward felt unbearable. The phone call played over and over in his head. Serious injuries, blood transfusion, immediate presence. His mind leaped to the worst-case scenarios, each one worse than the last. By the time the hospital came into view, Alex's chest was heaving. He screeched into the parking lot, barely managing to park straight, and bolted from the car. The sterile, fluorescent-lit lobby was too bright, too quiet, like a jarring contrast to the chaos inside Alex's head. The sharp scent of disinfectant hit him as he pushed through the doors, scanning the room for anyone who might have answers. A nurse at the front desk looked up, her expression calm but tinged with concern. "Alex Collins," he said quickly, his voice strained. "I'm here for my daughter, Maddie Collins." The nurse nodded briskly, flipping through a clipboard. "Follow me, please." Her efficient stride barely gave Alex time to keep up as she led him down a maze of brightly lit hallways. The sound of her shoes clicking against the tile floor reverberated in his ears, each step a countdown to the news he both dreaded and needed to hear. She stopped outside a room, turning to him with a clinical expression. "Your daughter's condition is stable for now, but she urgently needs a blood transfusion. We'll need you to provide a sample." Alex nodded quickly, his relief at hearing the word stable tempered by the urgency in her voice. "Anything. Just tell me what to do." Minutes later, he was sitting in a sterile lab chair, his arm outstretched as a technician drew his blood. The room was quiet, except for the faint hum of machinery and the soft scratch of the technician's pen on paper. "Will this be enough?" Alex asked, his voice shaky. "We'll test it immediately," the technician replied, her tone neutral. "Please wait in the family area." Alex paced the small waiting room, the walls closing in on him with every second that passed. He checked his phone obsessively, though he wasn't sure what he expected. A message from Sarah, maybe, telling him everything was fine, that this was all some horrible mistake. But his phone remained silent. He stared out the window at the darkened parking lot, his reflection in the glass a pale, ghostly version of himself. His mind churned with unanswered questions. How bad was the accident? What had caused it? How was Sarah holding up? His heart clenched as his thoughts turned to Maddie. He couldn't lose her. He wouldn't. After what felt like an eternity, the technician returned, her face unreadable. "Mr. Collins?" she began, her voice careful. Alex's stomach dropped. "What is it? Did the blood match?" The technician hesitated, glancing at the clipboard in her hands. "Your blood type isn't compatible with Maddie's." The room seemed to tilt. Alex shook his head, not understanding. "What do you mean?" he asked, his voice hoarse. "You're not a match," she said gently. "You're not her biological father." The words slammed into Alex like a freight train. He stumbled back into a chair, his legs giving out beneath him. That's impossible," he whispered, his mind struggling to grasp what she was saying. "I understand this is a shock," the technician said, her voice sympathetic but firm. "But we need to act quickly to find a suitable donor. We'll check the registry for matches." Alex barely heard her. His hands trembled as he buried his face in them, his world spinning out of control. Not her father. The words echoed in his mind, tearing through everything he thought he knew. How could that be? Maddie was his daughter. She had to be. "I'm sorry," the technician said again before stepping away, leaving Alex alone with the crushing weight of the truth. Alex sat in stunned silence, the sterile smell of the hospital surrounding him like a fog. His mind was a storm of disbelief and betrayal, the pieces of his life breaking apart and scattering like shattered glass. Not her father, he muttered to himself, the words foreign and bitter on his tongue. The nurse returned a moment later, handing him a clipboard with a consent form. "We'll keep you updated as soon as we find a match. Please, stay close." Alex nodded absently, signing his name without really looking at the paper. His thoughts were elsewhere, spiraling deeper into confusion. Who was Maddie's father, if not him? How long had Sarah known? And why hadn't she told him? He clenched his fists, anger mixing with the pain. Whatever the truth was, he would find it. He had to. Armed with the damning evidence, Alex sat in his dimly lit apartment, the folder Jack had given him spread out on the scratched surface of his kitchen table. The fluorescent bulb overhead buzzed faintly, casting uneven shadows on the walls as if the room itself recoiled from the weight of what the folder contained. Photos, emails, financial records, it was all there. Proof of Sarah's long-standing affair with Daniel Brent. Proof that Brent had manipulated events to isolate Alex. And, perhaps most gut-wrenching of all, proof that Maddie was not his biological daughter. The sheer volume of betrayal made Alex's chest ache. He picked up a photograph from the pile, his hand trembling slightly. It was of Sarah and Brent together, laughing at what looked like a dinner party. Sarah's hand rested lightly on Brent's shoulder, the intimacy between them undeniable. The timestamp was damning. It had been taken 6 months before Sarah and Alex's wedding. Alex dropped the photo and ran a hand through his hair, his mind racing. He couldn't stop staring at a different picture, though, the one of Maddie. She was smiling brightly, her eyes full of joy as she swung on a park set. Her innocence was a sharp contrast to the ugliness of the situation. "She's still my daughter," Alex muttered, his voice raw. "I don't care what the DNA says, she's mine." The thought gave him strength, hardening his resolve. No matter what Sarah and Brent had done, no matter how elaborate their scheme, he would fight to protect Maddie. As the hours ticked by, Alex meticulously combed through the documents again, making notes and connecting the dots. Jack had left nothing to chance. The folder contained screenshots of emails between Sarah and Brent, outlining their plans to frame Alex as unfit. One exchange stood out. Brent. "If the tutor plays her role correctly, Alex will take the bait. Once the divorce is final, we can move forward without him in the way." Sarah. "She's young, attractive, and he's lonely. It'll work." Alex slammed the folder shut, bile rising in his throat. The memory of Cassie's betrayal stung deeply now, reframed in light of this revelation. She had been a willing accomplice, playing her part to perfection. But Brent was the true puppet master. He had orchestrated everything, from the hiring of Cassie to the legal battle that left Alex nearly powerless. The next day, Alex drove to Jack's office, his mind buzzing with a mix of anger and determination. The private investigator greeted him with a curt nod, sliding a cup of coffee across the desk. "You look like you didn't sleep," Jack said, leaning back in his chair. "I didn't," Alex admitted, flipping the folder open once more. "This is airtight, right? Everything in here can hold up in court?" Jack nodded. "Every piece. I triple-checked. You have enough to tear their case apart, and then some." Alex's grip tightened on the folder. "Good, because I'm not just going to win in court. I'm going to make sure they regret everything they've done." Jack raised an eyebrow. "You have a plan?" "I'm working on it," Alex said grimly. "But first, I need to confront Sarah. Face to face, Jack's expression turned cautious. Tread carefully. People like Brent don't play fair. He's not going to back down easily. I'm counting on that, Alex replied. The following evening, Alex parked a block away from Sarah's house, his heart pounding as he rehearsed what he was going to say. The folder sat on the passenger seat beside him, its contents neatly organized and ready. He waited until the lights in the living room dimmed before making his move. The neighborhood was quiet, the occasional bark of a dog or hum of a distant car the only sounds. When he reached the front door, Alex hesitated for a moment, his hand hovering over the doorbell. Then he pressed it firmly, the chime echoing inside. Moments later, the door opened, and Sarah stood there, her expression shifting from surprise to guarded annoyance. "What are you doing here, Alex?" she asked, her tone cold. "We need to talk," he said simply, holding up the folder. "And you're going to want to hear this." Sarah led him into the living room, her arms crossed defensively. Brent wasn't there, which gave Alex a small measure of relief. He didn't want this to turn into a shouting match, yet. "What is this about?" Sarah demanded, sitting on the edge of the couch. Alex opened the folder and placed it on the coffee table, spreading out the most damning pieces of evidence. "This," he said, his voice low but steady, "this is about the lies you've been telling for years, about Maddie, about Brent, about everything." Sarah's eyes widened briefly before narrowing. "What are you talking about?" Alex jabbed a finger at the emails. "Don't play dumb, Sarah. I know about the affair. I know Maddie isn't mine. And I know you and Brent have been plotting to cut me out of her life completely." Sarah's face flushed, a mixture of anger and panic flashing across her features. "You don't understand?" "Oh, I understand perfectly," Alex interrupted, his voice rising. "I understand that you've been lying to me since the day we met. I understand that you let me love a child that wasn't mine while you plotted to destroy me." Sarah stood abruptly, her fists clenched. "Maddie is your daughter," she snapped. "You raised her." "But you made sure she wouldn't be mine legally," Alex cut in, his tone sharp. "You and Brent set me up to fail. Hiring Cassie? That was a new low, even for you." Sarah's expression faltered at the mention of Cassie. For the first time, she looked genuinely rattled. How do you know about that?" "I know everything," Alex said, leaning forward, "and I'm not going to let you and Brent get away with it." Sarah opened her mouth to respond, but Alex held up a hand. "Save it. You can explain yourself in court, because that's where this is headed." He gathered the documents and stood, his resolve unshaken. As he headed for the door, he turned back one last time. "Tell Brent I'm coming for him next," Alex said coldly, and with that, he walked out, leaving Sarah standing in stunned silence. The courtroom was packed, the air thick with tension as Alex entered, carrying a meticulously organized briefcase. His lawyer, a sharp-eyed woman named Linda Carter, greeted him with a confident nod. "You ready for this?" she asked, her voice low but firm. "As ready as I'll ever be," Alex replied, his jaw tight. Across the room, Sarah sat beside her attorney, her posture stiff. Daniel Brent was absent, his conspicuous absence already a point Linda planned to exploit. The judge, a middle-aged man with a stern expression, entered and called the court to order. "We are here to address the petition for custody modification in the matter of Maddie Collins," he announced, his voice echoing in the silent chamber. Linda wasted no time. She rose, presenting the stack of evidence Alex and Jack had painstakingly gathered. "Your Honor, we have reason to believe that the current custodial arrangement is not only unjust, but also unsafe for the child involved." The first piece of evidence was the email correspondence between Sarah and Brent, outlining their plan to use Cassie as a tool to manipulate Alex into losing custody. The courtroom murmured as the emails were read aloud. Sarah's attorney objected, claiming they were taken out of context, but Linda was prepared. "Your Honor," Linda said, holding up a printed timeline of events. These emails correlate directly with the timeline of the tutor's employment and the eventual accusations against my client. This was a calculated effort to frame Mr. Collins and strip him of his parental rights. Sarah squirmed in her seat, her face pale as Linda continued. Furthermore, Linda added, her voice rising, we have evidence linking Mr. Brent to criminal activities, including illegal pharmaceutical sales and financial fraud. He is not only unfit to be around the child, but has actively endangered her safety by his proximity. The judge leaned forward, his gaze sharp. Do you have proof of these allegations? Linda handed over a thick folder. We do, Your Honor. Included are financial records, police reports, and witness statements. When Sarah took the stand, her attempts to defend herself were weak at best. Her voice wavered as she denied knowing about Brent's criminal activities, but Linda quickly dismantled her claims. Mrs. Collins, Linda said, pacing in front of the stand, are you suggesting that you were completely unaware of Mr. Brent's history, despite having worked with him for years and engaging in a long-term relationship? Sarah faltered, her hands gripping the edges of the witness stand. I didn't think it was relevant. Not relevant? Linda echoed, her tone incredulous. You actively conspired with this man to undermine the father of your child, and now you want the court to believe you had no idea he was a criminal? The judge frowned, his disapproval evident. The most heartbreaking moment came when Maddie was called to testify. Protected by the court's procedures, she sat in a private room with a child advocate, her responses relayed to the courtroom. Do you feel safe with your father? The advocate asked gently. Yes, Maddie said, her small voice steady. Daddy always makes me feel safe. And how do you feel when you're with your mom and Mr. Brent? There was a long pause. Sometimes it's scary, Maddie admitted. Danny yells a lot, and he said I should call him Dad, but I don't want to. Tears welled in Alex's eyes as he listened. He clenched his fists, willing himself to stay composed. Brent's absence didn't save him from scrutiny. Jack had uncovered everything, from fraudulent business deals to his involvement in an illegal drug ring. When Linda presented this to the court, the judge's expression grew even graver. Mr. Brent's actions demonstrate a clear disregard for the law, Linda argued. He is a danger to everyone around him, especially a child as young as Maddie. Sarah's attorney tried to redirect the focus back to Alex's past struggles, but Linda was relentless. My client's difficulties were orchestrated by the very people standing against him today, she said, pointing to Sarah. He has shown resilience, responsibility, and a deep commitment to his daughter's well-being. After days of testimony and evidence, the judge rendered his decision. The courtroom fell silent as he spoke. It is the opinion of this court that the current custodial arrangement is not in the best interest of the child, the judge began. He turned to Alex. Mr. Collins, the evidence demonstrates that you were unjustly deprived of your parental rights. Full custody of Maddie Collins is hereby granted to you. Alex felt the weight of the world lift from his shoulders. He glanced at Linda, who gave him a small, victorious smile. The judge then turned to Sarah. Mrs. Collins, your actions have shown a reckless disregard for both the law and your child's emotional well-being. Your parental rights are hereby terminated. Sarah let out a gasp, her face crumpling as the words sank in. As the court proceedings concluded, news broke that Daniel Brent had fled town. Jack's contacts confirmed that Brent was on the run, evading not only the consequences of his actions in Alex's case, but also multiple criminal charges. Alex didn't care where Brent went. All that mattered was that he was out of Maddie's life for good. In the days that followed, Alex focused on Maddie. He worked tirelessly to make their home a place of safety and joy, determined to give her the stability she deserved. Though the scars of betrayal remained, Alex knew the fight had been worth it. As he watched Maddie laughing in their new backyard, her face bright with happiness, Alex finally allowed himself a moment of peace. The battle was over, but the healing had just begun. The early morning sunlight filtered through the half-drawn curtains of Alex's new home, casting a warm glow over the modest but inviting living room. Toys were scattered across the floor, a half-finished puzzle lay on the coffee table, and the faint smell of freshly brewed coffee wafted from the kitchen. Alex stood at the counter, pouring a cup of coffee into his favorite mug, the one Maddie had painted for him at a school art fair. The lopsided heart and smudged letters that spelled "Best Dad" always brought a smile to his face. "Daddy, where's my soccer ball?" Maddie's voice called from the hallway. "It's in the garage," Alex replied, setting his coffee down and heading toward her. "Let me grab it for you." Maddie, now 9 and full of energy, was a whirlwind of motion as she darted past him, already halfway to the garage. Her laughter echoed through the house, filling it with a life and warmth Alex hadn't felt in years. Later that day, Alex pulled into the fire station, where the familiar sight of the red engines and the smell of diesel fuel greeted him like old friends. The camaraderie of the crew, the adrenaline of the calls, and the sense of purpose had always been a cornerstone of his identity. "Collins! Back on time as always," Captain Harris called out, waving him over. "Someone's got to keep you on your toes," Alex quipped, adjusting his gear. As he joined the team for a quick briefing, Alex felt the unspoken respect from his colleagues. They knew the struggles he had faced, and his return to the job wasn't just about fighting fires, it was about reclaiming a piece of himself. The weekends were devoted to Maddie, but Alex also made time to give back to the community that had supported him during his darkest days. On Saturday afternoons, he volunteered at a local community center, leading workshops for single parents. "So, how do you handle the days when everything feels overwhelming?" a young father asked during one session. Alex leaned forward, his tone steady. "You take it one step at a time. Focus on the little victories, getting through the day, making your kids smile, building a routine. It's not easy, but you don't have to do it alone." The group nodded, their expressions a mix of relief and determination. Alex had been where they were, and seeing them take their first steps toward healing gave him a sense of purpose he hadn't felt before. The small house Alex had purchased was a far cry from the sprawling suburban home he once shared with Sarah, but it was everything he and Maddie needed. The cozy rooms, filled with sunlight streaming through the windows, exuded a warmth that had been missing in their lives for too long. Together, they transformed the house into a reflection of their new life, a place of comfort, love, and renewal. One Saturday morning, Alex and Maddie stood in the living room, examining paint swatches taped to the wall. "What about this one, Daddy?" Maddie pointed to a pale yellow sample. "It's like sunshine." Alex crouched to her level, tilting his head thoughtfully. "You're right. Sunshine it is." Maddie giggled, her enthusiasm infectious. They spent the afternoon painting, laughter echoing as they splattered paint on themselves almost as much as the walls. By evening, the room glowed with a soft yellow hue, and Alex stood back to admire their work. "Perfect," he said, resting a hand on Maddie's shoulder. She nodded solemnly. "We're like real artists, huh, Daddy?" "The best kind," he replied with a grin. The backyard soon became their favorite project. Alex and Maddie planted rows of flowers, from daisies to tulips, turning the once empty yard into a vibrant garden. Maddie insisted on adding a bird feeder, and every morning she would rush outside to check if any birds had come to visit. One morning, Maddie's excited voice broke the peaceful quiet of their weekend. "Daddy, look! The roses are blooming!" Alex emerged from the kitchen, wiping his hands on a towel, and followed her to the garden. Sure enough, the rose bushes they had planted weeks ago were bursting with vivid red blossoms, their fragrance filling the air. Alex knelt beside Maddie, brushing the dirt off his hands. "You've got a green thumb, kiddo. These are all you." Maddie beamed, her pride shining through. She reached out to touch one of the petals gently, as if it were the most delicate treasure in the world. "Do you think Mom would like them?" she asked, her voice soft. Alex paused, choosing his words carefully. "I think she'd be happy that you're happy." Maddie nodded, seemingly content with his answer, and skipped off to water the rest of the garden. Alex watched her, his chest tightening with a mix of pride and sadness. Maddie's resilience amazed him every day, but he knew the questions about Sarah weren't over. Later that day, they decided to celebrate their progress with a trip to the park. The warm breeze carried the scent of freshly cut grass, and children's laughter filled the air. Maddie ran ahead, her energy boundless as she darted toward the playground. Alex trailed behind, carrying a small picnic basket filled with sandwiches and Maddie's favorite lemonade. "Daddy, watch this," Maddie called, climbing to the top of the slide. "I'm watching, kiddo," Alex replied, shielding his eyes against the sun. Maddie slid down with a whoop, her laughter infectious. She landed in a heap at the bottom, jumping up and running toward the swings. Alex followed, settling onto a bench nearby as he watched her play. When Maddie spotted a kite seller, her eyes lit up. "Can we, Daddy? Please?" Alex chuckled and nodded, handing her a few bills. Moments later, Maddie was running across the grass, her kite soaring into the sky. "Daddy, come on!" she shouted, waving him over. Alex jogged to her side, taking hold of the kite string and helping her guide it higher. The joy in Maddie's laughter filled him with a deep sense of gratitude. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the park in hues of gold and pink, Maddie and Alex sprawled on the grass, staring up at the sky. The first stars began to appear, twinkling faintly against the deepening blue. Maddie leaned her head against Alex's shoulder, her voice quiet. "Do you think things will always be this good?" Alex wrapped an arm around her, his gaze fixed on the stars. "I think they'll keep getting better," he said with quiet confidence. Maddie smiled, closing her eyes as a cool breeze whispered through the trees. Alex rested his chin on the top of her head, feeling the weight of the past year lift a little more with each passing moment. They stayed there until the park grew quiet, the other families leaving one by one. Finally, Alex stood, scooping Maddie into his arms. She rested her head against his shoulder, half asleep but content. Back at the house, Alex carried Maddie to her room, tucking her under the covers. She stirred briefly, her eyes fluttering open. "Love you, Daddy," she murmured. "Love you too, Maddie," Alex whispered, brushing a strand of hair from her face. As he stepped into the hallway, he glanced back at her peaceful form, a soft smile tugging at his lips. This was home. Messy, imperfect, but filled with love. Downstairs, he sank into the couch, the quiet hum of the refrigerator and the occasional creak of the house the only sounds. He picked up the book Maddie had insisted he read, flipping through its worn pages with a faint smile. The scars of the past remained, but they no longer defined him. He and Maddie were building something new, something stronger, and for the first time in a long while, Alex felt at peace.